Ion, whom the gods would destroy. 40 years, 10 months, and 5 days after Longview, whom the gods would destroy they first make mad. Ancient Greek proverb. Several days later, with bright morning sunshine streaming through the windows of the town hall meeting chamber, the Boulder Town Council and the Jefferson County Commissioners convened a special closed session where they sat in a growing panic. They listened to the Economic Recovery Administration's Special Undersecretary for Development in Montana describe in rosy hues, complete with a PowerPoint presentation, all the manufacturing and research facilities the U.S. government and its various agencies wanted to build in no less than 4 special new industrial parks around the county. The construction alone would bring in enough money to put the county back on its feet for years to come, and update every facility and piece of equipment that hadn't been upgraded for decades. This in turn would lead to the influx of at least 10,000 highly paid new residents within the next 2 years, all of whom would need housing and feeding and clothing, to the immense profit of the existing townsfolk. They were being offered an economic boom that would change the life of everyone on the eastern side of the border highway forever. It all looked to be above board. Millions of new American dollars were about to come cascading down into Boulder like a modern-day Comstock load, along with a number of armed men and racial minorities whose presence would almost certainly provoke violent confrontations with the Northwest American Republic. The price of the boom was a return to living in a war zone, which many of the listeners remembered from their youth, not fondly. So far, so good. At least the city and county fathers had been prepared for that, and they thought they understood where the thorns in the bouquet of roses were hidden. Then this woman of color proceeded to spiral off into sheer madness. Gabrielle Martin was a tall and elegant negress, very black. Like generations of so-called African-American professional women, she strove to come across as white as she could without actually bleaching her skin like the ancient freak Michael Jackson, although some went that extra mile as well. She had permanently straightened and softened the shiny ebony hair on her nappy head, from steel wool down into a lacquered-looking mop, in the chemical procedure called a conch. Liposuction had thinned her bubble lips and reduced her massive buttocks, while surgery had narrowed her shovel nose until it was almost aquiline. She'd had sinus implants that altered the sound of her voice and gotten rid of the deep nasal resonance which was the biological hallmark of black people, so that she not only talked white, she sounded white. She was dressed to the nines in a power woman suit and doused in perfume to stifle her acrid negroid body odor, which was the one thing that American cosmetic science had yet to find a workaround for. As usual, the perfume was only partially successful. Gabby was accompanied from Burlington, USA, United States Administration Center, by 3 men and 1 woman. Her primary aide and gopher was a tired and harried-looking white man in his early 50s, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a battered bureaucrat's briefcase, named Brandon Blackwell. Blackwell was some kind of lifelong civil service drone from Burlington, the white guy who in the traditional American arrangement did all his nigger boss's actual work and made sure his superior did not fall flat on his or her monkey face. 2 low-key FBI agents stood unobtrusively to Gabby Martin's rear during her presentation, guns discreetly concealed under flawlessly tailored jackets. One was a large white male of the buzz-cut Judeo-Christian football player type from American Texas named Earl Hornbuckle. The American ruling class had long ago realized that there were certain advantages to allowing a small number of white people to remain mentally frozen in the era of Pat Boone and Ronald Reagan, like flies in amber. Protestant evangelicals who deeply and sincerely believed that Jews were the apple of God's eye, and to criticize or argue with them was blasphemy, had for years made up the battering edge of spies, torturers, secret policemen, and federal leg breakers in the United States. Hornbuckle was part of this tradition. He knew it, and he was even proud of the fact. Agent Mona James was a brown woman of the indeterminate racial category known as a Hapa. Hapas, or Pacific Mestizos, had been a growing West Coast phenomenon in the 2 generations before the Northwest War of Independence. They were usually some kind of Pacific Islander Filipino mix, but their bloodlines often contained dollops of white, black, Chinese or Indo-Chinese, Polynesian, and maybe a little exotic who knows what like Malay or Tongan or Samoan. During the Northwest War of Independence, the Hapas had been killed by the NVA or driven out of the homeland, most of them southward to California. Then, after the formation of Aztlan and the years after Longview, Hapas had to go on the run again, when many more were killed, and most of the rest driven eastward by the Aztec regime, in the name of limpieza de sangre de la raza. In theory, anyone who wanted to could live in Aztlan, so long as they learned Spanish and paid lip service to diversity. This diversity existed only in flowery official phrases. In actual practice, it meant brown supremacy. Anyone other than a Hispanic mestizo who tried to live there was a third-class citizen and had rocks in his head. A small number of gringos were grudgingly tolerated as technocrats to keep the electric power more or less running, keep the TV on the air, keep the cell towers functioning most of the time, and fix the Jeffy's cars and air conditioners and other toys. In this, Aztlan was typical of most of the rest of Latin America for the past several centuries. Non-mestizo brown or yellow minorities in Aztlan were marginalized, persecuted, and murdered. Mona James's skin was the color of coffee with one creamer, just a little too muddy to be acceptable to the Aztecs, who prided themselves in being almost orange. Along with her Anglo surname, this had been reason enough for her to leave Los Angeles at a young age. She was in her early 30s now, and she didn't look too bad. Like her boss, Mona kept her long black hair straight as a sheaf of arrows and done up into a severe bun. Her nose and lips were either surgically or naturally thin enough to avoid the primate-like physiognomy of her Negro ancestors, be they from Alabama or Tonga she didn't know herself. Her diction was devoid of accent, and her conversation, when she spoke, demonstrated actual cognitive faculties that Gabby lacked, which was Mona's white chromosomes kicking in. The two federal agents were officially security aides. Mona's Negro boss couldn't think. Her Caucasian partner had never been taught how. Brandon Blackwell was white and male and old, and therefore not sufficiently politically sound to be entrusted with the details. And the British mercenary Colonel Malcolm Hart of the New Model Army was attached to the group, with another remit altogether, and not part of the central effort. Ergo, Mona James was the one actually in charge of the team's mission, which he had to accomplish without Gabby Martin figuring out the fact. Not that Gabby didn't have the rap down well. One ability she did possess was a good memory, souped up by special medications designed to stimulate her cortical synapses. These had been used by the black upper class for decades, even before the War of Independence. They were standard prescription for senior African American government personnel or celebrities who had to appear in public or in front of the media. Known officially as cognition enhancement aids and unofficially as smart nigger pills, they were basically massive vitamin B and omega-3 supplements laced with the nootropic dopamines, L-tyrosine and biopterin, as well as a healthy shot of Aricept to increase oxygen flow to the brain temporarily. What this cocktail did was for a short time increase the number of brain synapses that were actually firing and increase NMA neuron memory allocation, so that a Negro could remember more of his or her pre-learned knowledge more quickly, and within the limited parameters of that programming respond more immediately and spontaneously. This meant that, with the help of cognition aid medication, someone like Gabby Martin could actually conduct what might pass for an intelligent conversation, as long as it didn't last too long or stray outside the knowledge and talking points that had been carefully drummed into her. The little blue pills made. Black seemed smarter, and it was part of Agent Mona James's job to make sure that Gabby always took her smart pills. Now the men listening to Gabby were stunned at what they were hearing. She had been going on and on about the need to repair Jefferson County's roads and install the electronic grids in the asphalt to make most of them levitation capable for the incoming yuppies' private cars. And then she had slid into something about constructive engagement with the Northwest Republic. Wait a minute, Ms. Martin, spoke up Shep Akins. Say what? We believe in a policy of constructive engagement as a form of conflict resolution. Gabby prattled on, her immense white teeth gleaming as her mouth moved. This is how South Africa was gradually moved away from the evil of apartheid late in the last century. Let me be blunt, ladies and gentlemen. In view of the failure of the military option some years ago, it is clear that we have to use a multi-layered and multidisciplinary approach to the problem posed by the final eradication of racism in the world. These people in the racist entity have to be shown the error of their ways, in a manner of speaking, but it has to be done very gently to avoid inappropriate responses on their part. We have to explain to them in simple terms they can understand how and why they are so wrong. We must appeal to their better natures, along with offering them a share in our new prosperity, of course. We must establish little islands or beachheads of tolerance, one racist at a time. I am looking forward to beginning this process with my own initial meeting with the civil authorities in the racist entity. Do you realize most of them have never even personally met a person of color? What? Said Sheriff Ben Lomax. He wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Oh, didn't I mention it? Said Gabby brightly from the podium. I'm sorry, it must have slipped my mind. My husband and I are going to be among the first new residents of Boulder, so that I can personally supervise and become involved in every aspect of creating the Prosperity Zone. We'll be coming out permanently next month, and I must say I am really looking forward to living in this beautiful part of the United States. I know Joseph and the kids will love it here. Okay, replied Lomax, bemused. But what was that you said about meeting with the civil authorities in what you call the racist entity? First off, may I ask what civil authorities you refer to? Well, I'll meet with whoever's in charge over there as necessary to solve whatever issues come up, said Gabby, waving her hand vaguely. The locals stared at one another, dumbfounded. Mayor J. Gavin stood up. Ma'am, if I might ask, what exactly have you been told by those folks in Burlington about how things actually work over the road? About how their society is organized? Surely they have some kind of local government, exclaimed Gabby. You didn't bother to find out before you came out here? Asked Monty Sanderson, stunned. Mayor Gavin sighed. Ma'am, right now things in the western part of Montana are kind of like they were back 150 years ago. Not much government, and what there is of it is mostly local. It's true that the larger cities like Missoula and Kalispell and towns like Northwest Helena and Northwest Butte have city councils and mayors. Those are voted in every 6 years in one big election. Their national election for all offices from their president on down, by the people who have earned citizenship and the right to vote through service in the military or otherwise. Sometimes in the case of women, by having children. Gavin had almost said white children. The days when a white male could be arrested and imprisoned for so much as mentioning race at all were gone, but it still wasn't the done thing. There's a sheriff for each of their counties, but the sheriff is a civil official and not a law enforcement officer like here. Over there, the sheriff is an administrator who runs the government's business for the county. I seem to recall hearing somewhere they got that idea from the Middle Ages in England, which is what sheriffs originally were. But that doesn't apply on this part of the border. Jefferson County was always a rural area, and outside the cities in the Northwest, in the racist entity, the fact is that there is very little government of any kind. Well, I'll meet with this sheriff then, said Gabby Martine impatiently. Mayor Gavin went on. There isn't one over there, at least not for the immediate area. They've created the Montana Border District, which runs about 30 miles or so westward from Interstate 15, except for the city limits of some of the divided towns like Helena and Butte. It dates from the time when we had those fucking kooks. Sorry, those liberation fighters over here on our side who used to go into the Republic, the entity, and plant landmines and murder people and kill their cattle and that kind of thing. The Border District is essentially an eminent domain setup wherein the NDF and the Civil Guards, that's their police force, can go anywhere and can search private property at will in order to deal with anybody who comes across the border looking for trouble. In the rest of the screw the entity crap. In the rest of the Republic, the police and the military need a search warrant or permission from the owner to go on private property, except for the Bureau of State Security. Those guys can go anywhere and do anything they want, but there aren't very many of them, and nobody ever sees them unless they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. In the Border District, the cops and the army can go on private land when they have to in the course of a pursuit or setting up an ambush for anybody they think might be coming across the border to do harm. Their helicopters and levitating cars can fly over people's property looking for trespassers and also to pick up white people who cross the border fleeing from this country and into the Republic. That's illegal, pointed out Gabby Martine archly. Yes, ma'am, replied Gavin in a tired voice. Obviously, that's one of the things I need to talk to these local authorities on their side about, she said. We need to persuade them to accept the rule of law Their law says you can't set foot on their turf without getting your fool head blown off, snorted Monty Sanderson. Gavin resumed hastily. Anyway, Ms. Martine, what I'm getting at is that there is no real civil authority immediately on the other side of the road from us. Except, I guess, the commander of their civil guard post and any of their military that happens to be passing, though. The town of Basin doesn't have a mayor or a council. There's only about 400 people living there, and they decided they don't need one. The town is run by a manager hired by the nearest sheriff outside the district, who I guess would be in Missoula, but he's just an employee. He deals with their utilities like Northwest Power and Light and runs the water and sewage treatment plant, but he doesn't have any political power. I think they have a circuit riding judge who comes by every 3 or 4 months or so to hear any pending legal cases, which I understand are usually convened in a local saloon, just like in the frontier days. Well, if you know your history, there were people of color around this part of the world in the frontier days, and now there's a woman of color with power here again, said Gabby with a silvery laugh. The power of the purse, anyway. I'm a representative of the United States government, which they may not respect, but I'm going to be bringing many millions of dollars into this area, which inevitably they will be getting a piece of. Money knows no borders, Mr. Gavin. You need to read up on your Ayn Rand. Anyway, I don't need to be meeting with any of my counterparts over the road yet, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. After the meeting, Jay Gavin, Ben Lomax, and Monty Sanderson cornered Brandon Blackwell in the office that Gabby and her team had been lent by the town council. What the hell is going on, Blackwell? Demanded Monty Sanderson roughly. First off, who and what are you exactly, and what's your role in all this? Is this some kind of joke, or has the U.S. government decided they want to provoke another war? You do realize, do you not, that this is insane? What fucking planet are you people living on to come here and spout drivel like that? What can I tell you? Replied Blackwell with a shrug. I don't make policy. I'm just here to hold my power lady's briefcase and pick up her dry cleaning. Bullshit, said Sanderson. And keep track of the money and her appointment book and prepare her speeches and media briefings and go over all her memos and whatnot from Burlington and make sure she has at least some vague understanding of what she's supposed to be doing here, admitted Blackwell. What does she think she's supposed to be doing here? Asked Lomax. Building a kind of Disneyland for her and all her friends so they can come here during the summer and watch the buffalo and ride horses on a dude ranch? Blackwell told them irritably. Hell, I don't know. Look, I can tell you this, the CPZ is the real deal. The USA has got to step up its game economically, or we've got about 24 cities that are going to blow within the next few years because we're not able to keep their inhabitants fed and pacified anymore. That's where most of you guys' beef and wheat is going to. That means we have to start optimizing our human resources, so to speak, meaning you've got to move as much economic infrastructure as possible into the whitest remaining areas in the country so you can actually get some producing done without the whole kit and caboodle being looted and burned down by rioting mud people when the cities blow, said Sanderson. Even the other two winced at his racial bluntness, but Blackwell didn't bat an eyelash. Pretty much, yeah. I agree. I think this constructive engagement idea is unlikely to work, but President Humperdinck and the cabinet want to try it. You can tell Rumpelstiltskin, for me, that he's flipped his pint-sized little lid, said Monty Sanderson. And what the hell is the idea of bringing in new model army troops right up to the road? They won't be right up on the road, said Blackwell. There won't be any really big bases, at least not in this part of the CPZ. That's what Colonel Hart is here for. He'll be selecting locations and facilities for a whole long series of company-sized posts, old farmhouses and abandoned buildings of various kinds. That's the first of the CPZ cash you folks will actually see when the NMA buys the land and starts building their barracks and whatnot. We're not looking to start any fights with that bunch over the road. The threat the NMA will be anticipating will be coming from the east. You think so? It's going to get that bad, is it? Asked Lomax. When the rings around the cities are finally breached and mass migrations of millions of people in search of food and resources start. To wander across the land? Replied Blackwell grimly. Oh, yeah. You better believe it. Later on in Mayor Gavin's office, the kitchen cabinet met in emergency session. The first thing we have to do is stop that crazy nigger bitch from going over the road and knocking on people's doors, said Monty Sanderson. Do you think that Blackwell guy would help? He at least seems to have his head screwed on straight. He also draws his paycheck from Burlington, said Gavin. We need to be careful around him. Around all of them. Ben, if they're going ahead with this craziness, we need to try and get ahead of it, said Lomax. I suppose I'd better give that kid over in Basin a call. That new Civil Guard lieutenant in charge, the one who's married to President Wallace's assassin's daughter. Sounds like he'd be pretty well politically connected then, suggested Sanderson. That's what I'm counting on, Monty, said Lomax with a nod. I'm hoping that whatever I tell him will go straight on up the line to their power structure over there. Maybe I can convince them it's not our doing and talk them out of hammering the hell out of Boulder and Jefferson County when they do whatever the hell they decide to do about this lunacy. Is that wise? Asked Gavin. Why not let sleeping dogs lie until we have no choice left? They won't be sleeping long when bulldozers and Mexican labor crews start coming in here, and besides, they probably know more already about what's going on than we do.
How do you think the Goots will react?
Asked J. Gavin. I won't try to guess, but I know it won't be pretty, replied Lomax. Bobby tell you he got a call on his hotline phone to meet with that Jefferson County sheriff tomorrow? Asked Colonel Robert Campbell. He and Major Tom Horikova were sitting in the bar at the guest house over steins of Rogue Brewery ale from Oregon. Yes, replied Tom. Apparently this Lomax character didn't tell Bobby what it was about, just mentioned matters of mutual interest. I was tempted to offer to go with him and sit in on the meet to give him some extra weight this first time, but I decided not to. Good, said Campbell with an approving nod. You know he's got a bit of a complex about being Mr. Allura Myers. He needs to show he can handle things on his own. You sure he can? Asked Tom. If I didn't think so, he wouldn't be here. The two men met at noon the next day, in a designated spot right on the border that had been set up on the QT for that purpose many years before. It was an ancient single-wide trailer that had been hauled into the right lane of 2nd Avenue going out of Boulder, dead center under the old I-15 overpass. There were 3 entrances to the trailer, a door in each end, and one in the center which was never used due to the insuperable difficulties in protocol and the possibility that if it was used, an official of one government might inadvertently enter the other's country and cause mass hysteria in Olympia, Burlington, D.C., or all of the above. Bobby 3 pulled up on the western end, and he and Corporal Mike Sweeney got out of their green Civil Guard squad car. The informal protocol that had grown up over the years required each participant to bring a witness to vouch for whatever was said, if necessary, and to make sure no secret deals were being plotted behind anyone's back. Sweeney had already attended several such conferences between Lomax and Bobby's predecessor, Captain M.C. Owen. They left the squad car's green and blue LED lights flashing. Looking down the street, they saw a Jefferson County sheriff's car parked at the side of the road, its own blue and red lights flashing. They entered the trailer. Lomax was already seated behind a large battered wooden desk with a white line painted lengthwise down the middle, specially surveyed years ago to mark the border between the two countries. He stood up when the 2 guardsmen came in. Behind him stood a tall and lean deputy with a receding chin and large gray mustache that seemed to accentuate one another in counterpoint. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Sheriff Ben Lomax, Jefferson County, Montana. This is Lou Brumley, said Lomax, nodding back to his companion. Lieutenant Robert Campbell III, Basin Station Commander, replied Bobby. I think you already know Corporal Mike Sweeney? Yeah, I know Mike, replied Lomax. Hey, Ben, said Sweeney. Hey, Lou. Heard you bagged yourself. A moose last season. Yep, replied Brumley. 800-pound bull. Got the head and antlers on my wall and the steaks in my freezer. No one was so crass as to inquire as to how Sweeney knew about Brumley's moose. Bobby eyed the white line painted down the center of the desk with curiosity. Okay, what's the protocol here? If either of us sticks our hand over that line to shake with the other guy, is that some kind of incursion that's going to cause an international incident? Best shake right over the line just to make sure, said Lomax. They suited the action to the word and sat down. You'll note we have separate coffee makers, said Lomax, pointing to the counter behind Bobby. That way neither of us can accuse the other of poisoning him. That ever happened? Asked Bobby 3. Not here, said Lomax. I heard some funny stories about what used to happen up in Great Falls some years back. I told him we had to bring our own, said Sweeney, going over to the coffee maker and pulling a packet out of his pocket to start a brew. He then washed out 2 cups in the sink and dried them. They hadn't been used in some time and were dusty. "So, Sheriff, I hear you guys have some visitors from New England," said Bobby easily. "You want to talk about them or about our 2 star-crossed lovers?" "Mostly about our visitors, but while we're on the subject, any chance you can keep that Randy Johnny Selkirk on your side of the road?" asked Lomax. "I know the Tollivers. Wendell's all right. He's the kind of feller who gets along with everybody and thinks the past should stay in the past. But Danielle's mother, Alice, is a devout church lady of the traditional kind. She wouldn't think much of any man of 20 sniffing around her 16-year-old daughter, which I can't say I blame her for. And as to a Northman, well, she's fit to be tied. As far as Alice is concerned, you're every one of you Lucifer's minions on Earth. I understand she's thinking about sending Danny off to school in North Dakota somewhere to get her away from Johnny." "That might solve the problem," agreed Bobby. "Trouble is, John Selkirk is also something of an import-export entrepreneur." "I know it," said Lomax sourly. "When he's coming back from a run, he likes to go through Boulder at 90 miles an hour on his final approach. He keeps on doing that shit and I catch him over here, I'm locking him up." Bobby resisted the urge to bristle. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said. "The point I was making is that Johnny's runs generally take him to Minneapolis or Milwaukee or Chicago, or at least the white suburbs thereof that are outside the Bremer walls and minefields. If he knew where Danny was in Dakota, he might stop by for a visit on his way back." "The main problem is the grandfather, Elwood Tolliver," said Lomax. "He's been limping for 40 years, and you can carry an awful lot of grudge on a bum leg for that long a time, not to mention that the kid is the grandson of the man who made him that way. If he catches Johnny and Danny together, especially if it's in flagrante delicto, so to speak, then depending on who can get to their gun faster, one of them's going to end up dead. I know you guys take a more laid-back view of a little casual personal bloodletting, but that's not the way it works in this part of Montana. We do things the old way. We're still part of the civilized world, and when somebody shoots somebody else, then the law steps in. No offense." "None taken," replied Bobby with a laugh. Corporal Sweeney handed him a cup of black coffee. "Thanks, Mike. Actually, it's we who do things the old way, Sheriff. Or the older way, I guess you could say. But you're right. We're not civilized, not by your standards, and we sure as hell don't want to be. We were civilized for many generations, and it damn near killed us off. Look, I've spoken to both Hatcher and John both about this, and Johnny told me to mind my own business, which is his right. I'll talk to Captain Selkirk himself next time I see him. But I can tell you this much, the Selkirk family isn't any happier about this situation than the Tollivers. They've made that clear to Johnny, and beyond that there's not much I can do. We don't have restraining orders and lawsuits and all that crap in the Republic. They are an offense to human dignity, and one of the reasons our ancestors did the old revolution trick 40 years ago." "Oliver Wendell Holmes said that the law is meant to be a shield, not a sword," Lomax reminded him. Oliver Wendell Holmes lived in a stable and orderly world run by educated white men with moral principles and consciences, where niggers weren't allowed to run wild like troops of baboons, and where there were no Mexicans, no Somali warlords ruling American cities, no drugs, and no buggery, said Bobby. In his world, that was a noble sentiment, because they still had genuine freedom to counterbalance the law. The last of that world died in 1933 when a syphilitic cripple and his bull-dyke wife seized the White House. I know, backlash never replays like the original, but in the Northwest Republic we've tried to bring the best of that world back, and I'm not just talking about the clothes. You know our motto in the Guards? I don't mean Custodes Libertas, the Latin one on our official seal. I mean the one in English, that hangs somewhere on the wall of every guard station, including ours over in Basin? Yeah, MC Owen told me once, chuckled Lomax. Something like, it's not a problem until it's a problem. That the one? That's it, said Bobby with a smile. That's our attitude. We're not there primarily to enforce the law, because there's not that much law to enforce. We are there to maintain the state in existence, which is really the purpose of every police force the world over and has been since the beginning. We're just more honest about it than most. Okay, all these philosophical digressions aside, what are we going to do if this Johnny and Danny situation blows up on us? Asked Lomax. Frankly, I think it's more likely to be a blow-up if something happens on your side of the road, what with all your laws and all, Bobby said. I think we agree that the main thing is to keep Elwood Tolliver and Johnny Selkirk from having a close encounter. I gather the old man never comes over here, as a matter of principle. I know you can't become involved in helping an adolescent girl sneak out behind her family's back, but how's this? I'll talk to Selkirk and see if I can persuade him to persuade Danny in turn to do all their socializing on our side, in Basin, or maybe down in Northwest Butte. I don't think Elwood and Alice Tolliver are going to consider Danny running around in Butte with a boy 4 years older than she is much of a solution, said Lomax dryly. Then they can go ahead and send Danny off to school in Dakota, said Bobby. She's their child. I'm just trying to avoid any bodies dropping over this. Besides, they're young. They may decide they're not meant to be and just break up like kids do. And what if Danny ends up pregnant? Asked Lomax. Then John will shoulder his responsibility however the two families feel is appropriate, said Bobby. That's the way we do things on our side of the road. I have to admit that's what I've heard, said Lomax with a nod. Well, I guess we just have to see how it plays out. Now, about these visitors you mentioned. Lomax sighed. Where to begin? I know all about the community prosperity zone thing, said Bobby 3. Of course you do. What I can't understand is why in God's name they sent a nigger, which is bad taste to say the least, and a couple of FBI agents, which is a flat-out violation of the armistice of 28 years ago, and then this merc from the new model army. The best I can figure is that for some reason having nothing to do with sanity, the rump USA regime has decided to spit right in the Republic's face and see what happens. I can tell you this much, said Lomax seriously. We've had some pretty strong assurances over on our side that this whole prosperity zone thing is the real MC Coy, and we want it bad. So why not send some nice, quiet, competent white bureaucrats to iron out the details and then start building all your factories and office buildings and fancy coffee shops and whatnot, using local contractors and labor? Asked Bobby. East Montana's unemployment rate has been running at a steady 9% for years, and the only reason it's not any higher is that all the young people leave the state as soon as they get their high school diplomas in their hands. That's why we want all these jobs and these new people, said Lomax. Even if some of them aren't the right kind of people from our point of view, asked Bobby. Lomax scowled. Look, let me try and explain to you how it is. Back in our parents' and grandparents' time, for the last 3 years or so of the Trouble, Jefferson County had a higher per capita homicide rate than Chicago or Miami, and we were only just behind Baltimore. And it wasn't criminals or drug addicts or stick-up men or hadjis in turbans. It was men and a few women who grew up not 10 or 20 miles down the road from one another, who went to the same schools and the same churches and shopped in the same mighty marts all their lives, whose kids went to each other's birthday parties and who saw each other every day. Now all of a sudden, these people were wiring up Semtex in their garages and putting on body armor and loading magazines with bullets so they could sneak up on one another in the dark and commit murder. And they committed a lot of damned murder. You're not from here, Lieutenant, not even from your side of the road, so you don't know what that does to a small community of around 10,000 people who have intermarried so everybody's related, and who lived together for generations with not even much in the way of a crossword. Bobby decided now was not the time to interrupt. Lomax went on. Then 40 years ago we lost half the county to you lot, thanks to that airhead with the big hair who was sitting in the Oval Office at the time. Some of us lost our homes and businesses, and above all we lost friends and family to that goddamned war. To this day there are parents and children, brothers and sisters, and every kind of cousin in the book, who live not 10 miles from one another and who have never met or spoken to one another in their entire lives because of that horrible time. Then there was the Second War, and those of us who do remember you only as invaders who came with tanks and weapons and who we had to run and hide from. Okay, fair enough, your General Drones was a good man. He promised no one would be harmed, and he kept his word, but we both know that war has no rules, and that could have changed in a heartbeat if any American forces had come rolling down the road toward Boulder. I was very young during the 7 weeks, and I have some bad memories, but nothing as bad as being occupied, said Bobby soberly. Of course, I suspect that if the Americans had occupied Missoula, I would have some bad memories indeed if I were still alive. Look, Sheriff, I'm not going to argue or try to refight the War of Independence with you. I wasn't even born then, and for me to try and tell you how things were would be fatuous. All I can do is tell you what my aunt, my father's older sister Jenny, and her husband Jason told me now and then down through the years on the few occasions we talked about it. They told me that they did what they did Because the world had to change. That things had reached the point where that one thing was the overriding principle that had to govern every human action. If there was to be anything left for anyone, the world had to change, and there simply was no other way for that to happen than to fight. Every other way had been deliberately and maliciously blocked and closed off for years, by people who would say anything, do anything, commit any crime and any breach of decency, rather than surrender their power. That's what my aunt and her husband told me. They were there. They are both good and noble people, and I believe them. That's all I can say. Fair enough, said Lomax with a sigh. It ain't like either of us will ever convince the other. But you need to understand that this is how the people in my county feel about you. Not all of them hate you, but they're all afraid of you and they're very suspicious of you. You're like a biting dog, even if it's only once every few decades. No one knows when you'll bite again, or when someone will let you off your leash. Since the end of the Second War, what's left of Jefferson has been a kind of ghost land, a kind of limbo. It's like we were cut off from the world. Nobody wants to live here because you people are just across the road and we don't know when some stupid mess here or somewhere else in the country will start up something that brings your soldiers and your Stukas. Now we have a chance to rejoin the rest of the world, and not raise children just to send them east with a diploma in their hands when they turn 18. Why not send them west? Broke in Bobby, unable to resist. There is every opportunity anyone could wish for in Missoula or Seattle or Boise or anywhere between here and the Pacific. And it's their homeland after all. Lomax chuckled. Who says some of them don't go west? We just don't talk about them. He got serious again. I didn't mean to go off on a tear like that, Lieutenant, but I mean it. We want this new life for our homeland, small h, and if some of the people who come here to help us build that new life have brown or yellow or even black skins, we don't care. You do, and I reckon that's going to be a problem. Oh, you'll come to care all right, said Bobby with a sigh. Thanks to us, these creatures of the night have stayed away from Jefferson County for 2 generations, and you've forgotten what it's like to be around them. I suspect you'll remember soon enough, to your cost. Anyway, at some point it's clear these Arab people and their FBI and mercenary handmaidens intend to start something. I'm curious as to what, and as to how you think. They already have, interrupted Lomax. She wants to meet with you. Huh? Said Bobby. Who wants to meet with me? Deputy Era Director Gabrielle Martin. She wants to meet with you, get to know you, pursue constructive engagement with you, Lomax told him. But she's a nigger, said Bobby, uncomprehending. Yes, I know, said Lomax. But she feels that despite your cultural and political differences, a frank exchange of views on the basis of common interest is possible. These are her words now, bear in mind. What the hell is she talking about? Asked Bobby, puzzled. I'm white. She's a nigger. We have no common interest. She evidently disagrees, said Lomax with a straight face. Bobby 3 realized that Lomax was trying his best not to burst out laughing, but he was too bemused to be offended. What she agrees with or disagrees with is of no consequence to anybody or anything over here, he said, shaking his head, trying to wrap his mind around the whole absurd idea. She's a nigger. She's a lower primate. Anything she says or thinks has nothing to do with anything in the human world, any more than it matters what a goat or an orangutan thinks. I rather thought that would be your reaction, said Lomax, standing up. You guys are nothing if not consistent on racial matters. I just thought I'd mention it to give you some idea of what you're going to be up against, is all. While we're on the subject, who do I talk to if it comes to that? Asked Bobby 3. You have the hotline phone to me, and if there's any reason to do so, I can introduce you to Mayor Gavin and to a man named Monty Sanderson, who's kind of the biggest wheel in the county, business and social-wise, said Lomax. Yes, the name is familiar to me, said Bobby with a nod. Anybody white in the American team who might be approachable in some kind of real emergency? Feller named Brandon Blackwell, bureaucrat type, but not as stupid as he looks. He seems to be Gabby's minder, said Lomax. For real, Lieutenant, do you have any official answer to Ms. Martin's request for a personal meeting? Bobby grinned. Tell her my name isn't Dr. Doolittle, and I don't talk to the animals, he said.